Hey lads, Dragonflight Season 2 is now up and running and many people are coming back to a shaman or starting a restoration shaman for the first time, so they asked me to create a guide on what spells and what buttons to click when you go into a dungeon. Restoration Shaman is a class that primarily depends on direct healing spells, but it also has a wide range of cooldowns that can get you through tough situations. It brings great utility to the group, and if you decide so, you can also pump a significant amount of DPS. So without further ado, let's look into some talents and some buttons that you will be pressing once you go into an M+ dungeon. One of the most emblematic spells in your toolkit is called Riptide. It heals your target initially for a small amount and then leaves an 18-second HUD on it, which then synergizes pretty well with other talents and spells that you have at your disposal, as we're going to see shortly. Riptide also happens to be one of the most, or maybe even the most, mana efficient spells in the game, so basically you want to spread those and keep them up at all times, as you actually have 2 charges of that spell available with only a 6-second cooldown. As mentioned, the initial heal of the Riptide is not that big, and if somebody takes a huge amount of damage and you have to spam heal them, you have 2 spells which are single target healing spells at your disposal. One of them is very quick and it costs a lot of mana, this is Healing Surge. The other one is quite effective, called Healing Wave, but it is a bit slower to cast. Generally, you would like to spam the Healing Surges because they're faster and they're going to leave you with time to cast more spells and free up more global cooldowns. However, if you know that a long fight follows, or maybe if you're low on mana, you can prioritize a little bit the healing waves, especially if somebody is not threatened by an imminent death. You also have a few talents which enhance those spells, and here that value from the Riptide and the synergy with other talents is already visible. Every time you cast a Riptide, you get 2 stacks of Tidal Waves, which either reduce the cast time of your next healing wave, or increase the critical strike chance of your next healing surge. You also have a talent called Undulation, which makes it so that every 3rd healing wave or healing surge that you cast heals for additional 50% value. So when it comes into a single target healing, you spread the Riptides and then you spam the healing waves or the healing surges based on the situation to make sure that your tank never dies or whoever of your teammates is in dire need of heals. Alright, but now what if you have to heal more than one person? Then another iconic shaman spell is here to rescue us, that's Chain Heal. On paper, that spell does not sound that lucrative because it is very slow, it costs a lot of mana, it doesn't heal for that much, and each jump from the allies that get the subsequent jumps of that spell is less and less powerful. But at the same time, you have a ton of talents that actually enhance the Chain Heal and make it very, very powerful. Flow of the Tides makes it so the Chain Heal bounces an additional time, which can now cover all 5 members in your Mythic Plus dungeon party, and if your primary target is affected by Riptide, it increases the healing of the spell by 30%, which also applies to the subsequent jumps. The tooltip of Tidebringer is wrong here, it's every 8 seconds the cast time of your next Chain Heal is reduced by 50% and the jump distance is increased. You can have 2 charges of this, and the Tidal Waves that we mentioned earlier also reduce the cast time of Chain Heal as well as the Healing Wave if you have one of those stacks active. So with all those talents active, you become a Chain Heal machine gun which can keep your party topped up at all times. However, you have to be very careful about mana because this is not one of the cheapest spells in the game. However, you have a talent that even synergizes with the fact that you're spending a lot of mana, it's called High Tide, and the tooltip here is wrong as well, but every 100,000 mana that you spend makes it so that your next 2 chain heals heal for 10% more, and the subsequent jumps do not reduce that amount. So that buffs that spell even more and makes it that 1 chain heal can top up your entire group with just 1 cast. We also need to mention Healing Rain. You would like to cast the spell on top of your tank for several reasons. First, if you take the Acid Rain talent, this is going to be doing passive damage to all the mobs that he is tanking. But more importantly, if you spend 2 points in the Deluge talent, all of your spells, Healing Wave, Healing Surge and Chain Heal, are going to heal for 20% more in the target standing in your Healing Rain. If you look at your meters at the end of the run, Healing Rain's healing is not going to be that significant directly, but that 20% is actually huge coming from the Deluge talent, because as we mentioned earlier, Chain Heal by itself, it's not that powerful, so all we need to do is maximize its value by buffing that spell as much as we can. Healing Rain is also the main focus of our set bonus that we get in this patch. Every time you cast that spell, your Riptide targets get healed for a small amount, and then you're buffing your next healing wave, healing surge, or chain heal by a certain amount, giving you increased healing for 6 seconds as well. And since all you do is basically spread your Riptides, you're basically going to get some passive value out of the healing rain every time you cast that spell. Keep in mind that this set bonus is probably going to be much more powerful in Raid because you don't want to play around it in M+, and also the Flow of the Tides talent consumes some of the Riptides, which takes away from the value that this tier set bonus brings. But regardless, the value that Healing Rain brings is unquestionable, so you should be trying to keep that down as much as possible. And although those were a lot of spells and a lot of talents to cover, your main rotation is actually pretty simple. Keep your Healing Rain and Riptides up, and then if somebody needs a healing, Healing Surge. If more than one person needs a healing, Chain Heal. Everything else is going to take care by itself. Riptides are going to give you Tidal Waves proc. If people are standing inside of your Healing Rain, you're going to heal them for more. And Undulation Tidebringer and High Tides are going to make it so that your Healing Surges and Chain Heals heal for a lot more. If you're just starting with Restoration Shaman, this is actually what you want to practice first, get this down, and then the class actually has a lot more buttons and a lot more spells to press to bring more value to your party, or give you the edge in situations where the base healing is not going to be enough and you need a healing CD to help you out. The first thing to mention here is Earth Shield. This is a spell that you can cast on your tank, and it's not only going to heal them for a small amount when they take damage, but it also increases the healing that you do to them by 20% more. There is also an Elemental Orbit talent that allows you to cast the Earth Shield on the tank and then cast another one on yourself. You can pick few more talents. Surging Shields on the left hand side is going to require 2 points, but if you put 2 points in there, you increase the healing done by the Earth Shield by 25% more. And then in the Restoration Shaman tree, there's something called Earth and Harmony, which also requires 2 points, but this increases the healing done by 100% more as long as the target is below 75%. And it reduces the damage taken by the target by 6%. The 2 tips that you see on the screen right now are just for 1 point in those talents. So your next priority as a Restoration Shaman is to keep the Earth Shield active at all times on your tank and on yourself. This gives you both 6% damage reduction for all damage that happens during the dungeon, and it's going to heal you for a significant amount at the end because of all the talents that buff the healing done by the Earth Shield. I had keys where the Earth Shield healing would be second on my list of healing spells, and it would do between 10 and 15% of the overall healing that I do throughout the whole dungeon. And when you add the value from the damage reduction that it brings, this is actually one of the must-use spells at all times as a Restoration Shaman. And while we're talking about shields, Water Shield is a base spell that you should also keep on yourself at all times. You can do that because of the Elemental Orbit talent that we already took. It will not only restore mana back to you, but if you take the Resurgence talent, all of your critical strike hits will restore some mana back, which should help you with the high demand of mana casting Chain Heal. I would also recommend a way to track all 3 shields, the Earth Shield on your ally, the Earth Shield on yourself, and the Mana Shield on yourself, as you actually want to have 100% uptime on all 3, and if you cannot find something good, check the description of this video. I have a weak aura that tracks all 3 shields at the same time. The other more advanced spell that we must mention is Cloudburst Totem. Now let me first say, instead of Cloudburst, you can actually get Healing Stream Totem instead. In fact, if you're just starting to play Shaman, I would recommend playing with Healing Stream first, because once you drop it, you just forget about it. It will passively heal your party members, you get value out of it, and you don't have to track it or do anything like it. But you do want to get into the habit of pressing that button for later when you switch into Cloudburst, which is the more advanced play. Now, the idea behind this totem is that you drop it on the ground and it will absorb part of the healing that you're doing for the next 15 seconds, and that duration could actually be extended by taking some talents on the left hand side of the tree. It will then release that healing into a burst among your injured allies, and the most important part here is that you actually don't have to wait for those 15 seconds to expire to release the healing. Instead, you can press the button for a second time and that will trigger the totem to burst. This is actually very important because now you control when you can get that additional healing coming from the totem. So at the end, it all comes down to knowing the damage profile of the fights and the dungeon that you are in. If you know that there is a burst of damage or a hard boss mechanic coming up, you can drop the totem preemptively a little bit earlier than that, do your normal rotation, and when the mechanic happens, you can just burst your cloud burst and heal everybody to full. It takes a little bit of practice, a little bit of setup, but once you get into the habit of doing this correctly, it feels really good and really rewarding. Next, let's talk about some of the healing cooldowns that you can use, and we are starting with the two that are actually situated in the left hand side of the 3 talents. Ancestral Guidance basically increases your healing by 25% for 10 seconds. So every time things start to go south, you should consider just pressing that button. Its cooldown is just 2 minutes, which means that basically you can have it every other pull, or if you're in a long tyrannical fight, if you pop it in the beginning, it should probably be up for a second time before you kill the boss. There is also a pretty cool combo that you can do if you take Stormkeeper from the other side of the talent tree, which is a damaging talent. It makes your next 2 Chain Lightnings instant cast and they do 150% more damage. But since Ancestral Guidance converts damage to healing as well, if you're in a big AoE pack, you can just pop Stormkeeper, pop AG, and then just spam the 2 instant Chain Lightnings, which is going to top up your group just by doing damage. Definitely try out this combo, you're going to love it. And then the other talent that we have to mention here is Nature Swiftness. This just makes your next healing spell instant. It also has just a minute cooldown, which means you're going to have it for every trash pack or several times during a boss fight. So get into the habit of pressing this button as much as you can, because first, it makes the spell that you cast to cost no mana, and second, even if you don't need the healing and the burst right away, you can just press it and make your healing rain instant, which will not only increase your damage because of the acid rain, but will also increase your healing output for the subsequent spells. And now it's time for the big guns. When things go really south and you need a lot of healing or ways to save your party, Spirit Link Totems is one of the first things that you can think of when you talk about Restoration Shaman. It will redistribute the health of your party members inside of the link for 6 seconds, basically making you immune to that as long as you stay inside of the totem. Now, it's very important to know that the Spirit Link Totem itself, it's not going to do any healing. So do not think that once you drop it, your job is done. You actually have to pump a lot of heals to top people off. But at the same time, people often miss the fact that it also brings 10% damage reduction to everyone staying inside. So there are a couple of scenarios where this totem is actually very useful. If your tank is taking a lot of damage from a trash pack, and they're about to die, you can just drop the SLT and that is going to save their life. The other common scenario, there's a big boss mechanic coming up which is going to bring a lot of damage to your party. In that case, you can preemptively drop the Spirit Link, which is not only going to save somebody who is low on health and you did not manage to top off before that, but that 10% damage reduction is also going to significantly lower the received damage from your party members. I think this is also a very good point to mention your positioning as a shaman. First, let's say your tank is the only one standing in the SLT. In that case, there's no health to be redistributed and they will just simply die. So standing relatively close is going to ensure that there's at least one more person inside of the SLT, which will bring that value up. However, your positioning is even more important in some other situations. For example, the Cloudburst Totem. When the healing from the totem bursts, it is not expelled from the totem, but from the shaman itself. So even if you have this big cloud burst and you're standing away from all of your party members, it will be just wasted because it's not going to reach them. The same thing stands true for the chain heals. They only bounce 15 yards away, so if you have a range which is far away from the melee, you can actually position yourself in between and act as a link so your chain heals continue to bounce between the members. Your positioning is also very important for one of your biggest cooldowns called Ascendance. Every 3 minutes you can turn into this big godlike sand Sith Lord who does a big burst of AoE healing and then for 15 seconds it duplicates all of your healing spells and it distributes that healing among your allies, which basically means 200% increased healing. There are very little situations in which you cannot use Ascendance and save the day, so when the situation is really there, be ready to press that button. And again, be aware that both the burst of healing and the duplicated healing after that is coming out of the shaman. So your positioning is again very important. There is one more 3-minute cooldown that you can use. This is the Healing Tide Totem, which is not as powerful as Ascendance, but it got buffed in M+. It does a little bit more healing than it used to do before. And once you drop it, it's going to heal all of your party members in 4 yards for 10 seconds. So this could be particularly useful when all of your party members are low on health, you want to top them up, or in the boss fights where there's an aura with constantly ticking, rotting damage, bringing all of your party members down. So to summarize in terms of cooldowns that you can be using, Cloud Burst is your best friend. You have 2 charges of that, you have talents that increase the duration and reduce the cooldown of the totem. So first learn to press that button as often as possible and then try to learn the damage profile of the dungeon so you can maximize the value that you get out of the spell. Nature Swiftness has such a short cooldown that you should also be in the habit of pressing that button as often as possible. And then my advice is, whenever you need a little bit of help with healing, the next button in your mind should be Ancestral Guidance, because it is only a 2-minute cooldown compared to some of the longer ones on the other spells in this list. And then when you need really a lot of help, then you go to the Spirit Link Totem and the Ascendance. Keep in mind, as I said earlier, Spirit Link does not heal, so don't feel bad if you have to combine it with Healing Tide Totem on Ancestral Guidance or something like that. And usually by the time you rotate your Spirit Link in your Ascendance and your Healing Tide, your Ancestral Guidance is going to be back up for the next bursts of damage. Now, I know it's a lot of buttons and a lot of talents, but there's a few more spells that we need to mention here. I used to play with Downpour, which is a spell that heals everybody in a small circle. The more people you heal, the longer the cooldown is. This is a very specific spell, and you only get value of that if you can hit more than 3 or 4 people. So it is actually useful in a very specific situations, and I wouldn't recommend at this point to play with the spell, but it's good to know that it is there in the talents if you want to take it in your toolkit. I used to take that over Primordial Wave, which is actually not a bad spell. This will actually cast a Riptide or a Flame Shock on an enemy or a friendly target. And what you don't see on the tooltip is that your next healing wave is going to be cast on every target that has a ticking Riptide on them with 80% effectiveness. This is actually a pretty nice cooldown to have every 45 seconds, and I didn't want to play it before because the flow of the tides basically consumes the Riptides that we have on the targets. So I opted for Downpour, considering that to be the lesser of 2 evils. However, Primordial Wave could be a very powerful cooldown, and now it's going to bring us even more value because of the 4-piece set bonus that I showed you earlier. It will bring us more value the more Riptides we have spread, which is exactly what Primordial Wave does, and it has that hidden benefit of having that extra healing from the healing wave after that, which by the way is also very mana efficient. And speaking of mana, there's 2 more talents that you can actually pick, which are not also going to help you with the mana, but they can be a small healing cooldown as well. Every 3 minutes, Mana Tide Totem is going to increase your mana regeneration, and Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem is going to turn your Healing Wave and Chain Heals into 50% reduced cast time and 50% reduced mana cost spells for the next 10 seconds. So that's pretty much everything you're going to be using in your healing toolkit as a Restoration Shaman in Mythic Plus Dungeons. And if you have some downtime between your healing spells or you want to DPS a little bit, your DPS rotation is actually quite simple. Flame Shock a target. If you're in AoE situation, just press Chain Lightning, and of course keep Acid Rain up. If you're in single target situation, press Lava Burst if available, if not, press Lightning Bolt. And even if you don't like DPS, there are a couple of talents in the Restoration tree which can actually help you not only with DPS, but with healing as well. You can take Master of the Elements, which make it so that every time you cast Lava Burst, your next nature spell damage and healing is increased by 20%. So you can invest that proc into a Chain Lightning to do more damage, or just use it for your next healing spell, which will be even more effective than before. Usually, the best usage is in Healing Rain, because that not only does healing, but the Acid Rain damage is also increased by 20%. So you get the best of both worlds, and if you run Lava Surge, as long as you have a Flame Shock ticking, your next Lava Burst could be instant cast, which on its turn it's going to only cost you a GCD to proc the Master of the Elements. As a Shaman, of course, you bring a lot of utility to the group, starting with Bloodlust, and then you have the Windrush Totem, Thunder Shock, Cap Totem, Slow Totem, Remove Curse, Poison Cleansing Totem, Hex, Purge, and even one of the shortest interrupts in the game with Wind Shear. The only downside, of course, a lot of keybinds. But keep in mind that you don't have to take all of those spells for all of the dungeons. Some of them are just situational, and you can pick a much simpler build initially until you're learning the class and start adding the more complicated buttons one by one. Speaking of builds, here is a talent tree that I can suggest right now, which is covering almost everything that I've talked about in this video, which also has a lot of flexible points on the left hand side if you remove the 2 points from Elemental Warding, and you take some on-demand talents like Purge, Poison Cleansing, Totem, the Curse, or something else. The link to this build is in the description of this video, so you can just copy it from there and import it straight into your game. And for the grand finale, let's just mention the stats that you want to be aiming for. Your best stat is going to be crit all the time. High crit means that not only your spells are going to be hitting for more, but that also synergizes quite well with the Tidal Waves and the Healing Surge spell, which gets 30% crit from that proc. So if you're stacking a lot of crit, that basically guarantees that the spell is almost always going to crit, and the crit strikes also return mana to you, because of the Resurgence talent, so that's a win-win situation. The next stat you want to stack is Versatility, because this not only increases your damage and healing, but it also brings you some passive damage reduction, which becomes more and more important the higher M+ keys you're running. The other two stats are not bad for M+, but they're definitely not king there. Haste is going to make you cast faster and also run out of mana faster, while Mastery increases your healing down based on the missing health of the target. But in M+, we're just trying to keep everybody topped up, so they have as less missing health as possible, and if we're succeeding in that, that greatly diminishes the value of Mastery, almost nullifies it at some situations. So that will be all for this Restoration Shaman guide. Hopefully you like it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Maybe I missed something. And if you'd like, you can subscribe to my channel to find out more Restoration Shaman tips, Mythic Plus dungeon tips, and even some information on the other classes and specs that I play. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.